If you've ever looked at an ancient script and thought, how did we go from picture to letters? Or if you've ever wondered which letters have interesting origins and which letters are just meh. Or if you've ever wondered exactly how English made its way from its Phoenician origins, filtered through a Greek and Roman impact, and why it is so widespread today. If so, then today's series just might be for you. Today, I'm reviewing the Great Courses Lectures, Ancient Writing and the History of the Alphabet by John McWhorter. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and this is where I dive into the books, the lecture series, and curious content that I've been exploring. And that includes, of course, the Great Courses. I've been covering more of these courses here on the channel because they're structured like nonfiction books. They are packed with insight and often just as engaging. Now, one of the reasons I'm especially excited about this series, Ancient Writing and the History of the Alphabet by John McWhorter, is because I'm using it as part of my research for my other channel, History Unraveled with Dr. Duncan. Over there, I create long-form scripted history lectures, and as well as some short, punchy, fun videos that ask tough questions about the past. And I've been working on early human history and the rise of complex communication. So if that sounds remotely interesting to you, please go check out my other channel. Or if you're enjoying videos like this one that goes specifically with the Great Courses, I recommend checking out my playlist for the Great Courses that I have covered. Here on Spencer Reads Everything, I take a more relaxed approach and treat these great courses like the intellectually rich companions to my reading list. I think today's course is an especially fascinating one. Professor McWhorter takes us on a journey from ancient picture-based writing to the streamlined alphabet we use today, and he explains how that change shaped not only how we write, but how we think. Now, just a little bit on the presenter, Professor McWhorter. If you're not familiar with him, John McWhorter was actually one of the first Great Courses lectures I ever watched, and he's probably the reason I became such a Great Courses evangelist. His teaching style is clear, as well as funny, and clearly incredibly informed, and just a interesting person to learn from. I was hooked specifically after his series, The Story of Human Language, and I've made it a point to seek out everything else that he has done since then, especially for the Great Courses. Professor McWhorter is a linguist, an author, and a professor at Columbia University, where he teaches linguistics, American studies, and music history. He earned his PhD in linguistics from Stanford and has done extensive work on Creole languages, language evolution, and grammar simplification. He's also a prolific writer and cultural commentator, contributing to the New York Times, The Atlantic, and Time, among others. Beyond academia, McWhorter is a natural communicator. He used to host the podcast Lexicon Valley, and he has quite a few books, many dealing with language, but also lots of other things. So you have The Power of Babel, you have his one that just came out about pronouns, and he manages to make complex language theory genuinely interesting to read. Whether, of course, he's talking about stuff as esoteric as proto-languages and pidgins and creoles, or he's talking about politics of word choice and the way people speak today, especially in the political realm. Including this course, McWhorter is always insightful, often provocative, and consistently engaging, and so I think that there is a lot to really enjoy about the way that he teaches. With that in mind, let's move on to this actual course itself. This course, Ancient Writing and the History of the Alphabet, is a brisk, fascinating 16-lecture series, which is kind of short for the Great Courses, and it explores how human beings moved from oral traditions to written language and ultimately to the alphabet. Professor McWhorter walks us through the evolution of writing systems from cuneiform and hieroglyphics to the Latin alphabet we use today, explaining not only how they worked, but why they changed. The course begins with the basics, what writing is, how it differs from speech, and why early humans even bothered to record anything at all. And I will let you know now, it probably was not for poetry and wonderful literature. It had more to do with keeping records of your beer and barley. Then it dives into some of the earliest known systems like Sumerian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Chinese characters before tracing the arc of alphabetic writing through the Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans. One of the great strengths of this series is how Professor McWhorter blends linguistic analysis with cultural and historical context as well, something that he has a lot of interest in. He shows us that writing systems aren't just neutral tools, they reflect the societies that create and use them. The course also tackles interesting side paths like why Semitic scripts dropped vowels or never had them in the first place, how spelling conventions stuck long after pronunciation changed, and how the alphabet took hold while logographic systems remained dominant elsewhere, and in some cases just went out of use. Throughout, Professor McWhorter emphasizes that the alphabet is not necessarily the end goal of writing, it's just one path that happened to flourish largely due to historical and cultural accidents. With that, let's have a summary of each lecture one by one. It's only 16. I think I can give at least a couple of sentences on each of them. For starters, lecture 1, the nature of writing. This, our professor opens by defining writing, not just as a mirror of speech, but a complex system of symbols with its own evolution. He distinguishes between logographic, syllabic, and alphabetic systems, setting the stage for why the alphabet is such an unusual development in human history. Lecture 2, Cuneiform, the world's first writing. We go back to Sumer, where the wedge-shaped impressions on clay tablets became the first known system of writing. Professor McWhorter explains how cuneiform worked, what it recorded, and why it eventually fell out of use, although I will say it took a very long time to fall out of use. Lecture 3, how Egyptian hieroglyphs work. This lecture digs into hieroglyphs not just as sacred or decorative symbols, but as a full-fledged writing system. Professor McWhorter shows how they combine logographic and phonetic elements and why they remained mysterious for so long. And he talks a fair amount about hieroglyphs, and he has a few interesting stories and tidbits that I really enjoyed. Lecture 4, the invention of alphabets. Here the series pivots to the true stars, which of course are alphabets. In it, he traces their origins to Semitic peoples who simplified Egyptian hieroglyphs to create the first alphabetic script, stripped of vowels and streamlined for speed and simplicity. That would of course be famously the Phoenicians. And then in lecture 5, the alphabet goes east. Well, most of the focus is on the alphabet's westward journey. This lecture reminds us that the Phoenician script also went east, influencing writing systems in India and beyond. That the alphabet wasn't a singular Western achievement, it had global echoes. Lecture 6, the advent of A, E, and O. Now we get personal with the letters. McWhorter explores how Greek scribes added vowels to the Phoenician system and why that mattered so much for language representation and accessibility. Lecture 7, Lost at Sea. The letter C is a case study in historical weirdness. It's redundant, replaced by both K and S in various contexts. This lecture explores how Latin held on to C and why its use today is more legacy than necessarily logic. Lecture 8, the history of H. H has a quiet life in English today, but it wasn't always that way. The professor traces its ancient sound, why it survived at all, and how its ghostly presence still shapes modern spelling. Lecture 9, the inception of I and its journey to J. One of the more fascinating stories, I and J used to be the same letter. This lecture tells how J slowly emerged as a consonant in Latin-derived languages and how typography played a major role in doing that. Lecture 10, the quirks and zigzags of Q and Z. To the alphabet's oddest members, Q almost didn't survive, and Z was booted out and then reinstated. The professor explains their shaky place in the lineup and why they still hang around. Lecture 11, the ramblings of R. R has one of the most variable pronunciations in the world's languages. From rolled R's to the American bunched R, this letter has had a wild ride, and it still causes problems for language learners to this day, and so he explores exactly why that is. Lecture 12, the unfolding of U, V, W, and F. 4 letters, all historically entangled. U and V were once the same. W was literally a W. F evolved from a symbol not meant to be an F. It's alphabet chaos, and Professor McWhorter unravels it quite engagingly. Lecture 13, the yesteryears of Y. Y is an alphabetic chameleon. It acts as a vowel and a consonant, depending on context. This lecture explores its Greek roots and slippery function in English. Lecture 14, brisk sojourns through B, L, N, and S. McWhorter gives quick but illuminating histories of these common letters. I must say from the beginning, he says that some letters are more interesting than others, and he points out as B being one of those that he just does not quite care all that much about, so you can see why it gets lumped in with a whole bunch of other letters and why he considers them pretty common. But he does discuss how exactly they got their shapes, their sounds, and how uses have surprisingly shifted over time. Lecture 15, meditations on M, D, X, and T. M and D are old reliables, but X and T have unusual tales, especially X, which doesn't have a consistent pronunciation and often stands in for mystery or the unknown. Thinking algebra there. Lecture 16, how did punctuation develop? The course closes not with a letter, but with the marks that shape our sentences. From ancient dots and dashes to the invention of the question mark, Professor McWhorter shows how punctuation evolved alongside writing to guide how we read. One of the most compelling aspects of McWhorter's teaching, especially in this course, is how he challenges assumptions we don't even realize we had. Here are just some of the core arguments that shape this lecture series. For starters, he argues that the alphabet is not the inevitable endpoint of writing. A central theme of this course is that alphabetic writing is not the final stage of writing evolution. While it's easy to see our own system as superior with 26 letters to express almost any word, McWhorter pushes back on that idea. He argues that the alphabet is just one historical path among many, and its success is due more to accident as well as some elements of conquest and convenience than any actual innate linguistic brilliance. He also argues that writing is not just speech on paper. McWhorter makes a clear distinction between spoken and written language. Writing isn't a simple transcription of how people talk. It's an invention with its own rules and its own traditions and its own quirks. Cuneiform and hieroglyphs didn't capture speech in real time. They captured ideas, lists, names, and rituals. Even the alphabet, while closer to speech, still simplifies and distorts it. He also argues that writing systems reflect cultural needs, not universal logic. Each writing system, whether Chinese logographs or Phoenician consonant scripts, arose in response to specific cultural and practical needs. There's no right way to write a language. What works in one place might be baffling in another. The success of the alphabet in the West doesn't mean it's inherently better. It means it fit a particular set of circumstances quite well, and that is the path that it took through history. You can't necessarily say that it was inevitable, that there were just choices that got made over the year that made it the way that it developed in the West. He also argues that many of our letters are arbitrary survivals. He devotes a lot of time to showing how certain letters like Q, C, and even Z stuck around not because they were needed, but because of historical inertia. He argues that if we were designing a writing system from scratch, many of these letters wouldn't make the cut. The alphabet is not a pristine system. It's a survivor of centuries of political and religious and typographical decisions. He also argues that spelling and sound rarely match. And that's okay. He says that English speakers are used to spelling being inconsistent with pronunciation, but he also reminds us that this is a feature of most writing systems. Sure, some are worse than others, but pretty much every writing system has this issue. Spelling gets fossilized, especially after the printing press, while pronunciation continues to evolve. That tension between fixed letters and fluid speech is a natural byproduct of writing's long history, not a flaw to necessarily be fixed. Also, he argues that the alphabet spread was historical, not linguistic. Finally, he emphasizes that the alphabet's global reach is due to the spread of empire like Greek and the Romans and later European imperialism, not because it was inherently better. The alphabet's dominance is more a result of who conquered whom than of any linguistic advantage. Now, here's a few fun facts I found as I was going through it. The Phoenicians didn't have vowels. I think I've already pointed that out. It was, of course, created by a Semitic-speaking group of people, and they just used consonants. We see that to this day in most Semitic languages. Arabic does not write in their short vowels, and Hebrew does not write in their short vowels. And so you can see why the earliest form of the alphabet, which came through Phoenician, also did not have that feature. The letter J didn't exist until the 1500s. J is a relatively new invention. For most of history, I and J were the same letter. Shakespeare would have spelled Juliet with an I. Of course, I've already made this point, but I still find it interesting that Q barely made the cut. Q is one of the alphabet's least logical letters. It always needs a U, it duplicates K sounds, and it doesn't appear in many words, but it clings to life thanks to tradition and Latin legacy. Z was once removed from the alphabet. In classical Latin, Z was considered unnecessary and got kicked out, only to be reinstated later by scholars who wanted to represent Greek words more accurately. H used to be pronounced hard. H has lost most of its sound in modern English, but in ancient languages, it was breathy and forceful. In some dialects, it's still completely silent. It's the ghost of a once pronounced sound. W is literally a W. W is one of the only letters in English with a name that doesn't match its actual shape. It looks like a double V, not a W, but it's name stuck, and here we are. And actually, in some languages, like in French, they do call it a double V, W. The Latin alphabet was never finished. The Romans didn't originally use spaces or lowercase letters or punctuation. All of that was added over centuries by medieval scribes and printers and eventually some grammarians. Punctuation was invented by a librarian. The first true punctuation marks were created by Aristophanes of Byzantium, who was a Greek librarian in the 3rd century BCE, who added dots to help people read out loud with the right intonation. English spelling is frozen in time. Most English spelling was locked in place by printers in the 1500s, just as the language was undergoing major pronunciation shifts. That's why words like knight and colonel still look like linguistic fossils. I really enjoyed ancient writing and the history of the alphabet. John McWhorter was, as I said, the first great courses lecturer that I ever encountered, at least one of the first ones, certainly the first one that really left an imprint on me. And watching this reminded me why I've been such a fan of his over this time. There is something wonderfully accessible about his style. He has a gift for making complex linguistic ideas feel like natural, almost casual conversations. That said, this particular series is even more relaxed than some of his others. If you've watched The Story of Human Language or Language Families of the World, you might notice that ancient writing and the history of the alphabet is a little more free-flowing. Professor McWhorter lets his mind wander a bit more, thinking out loud as he works through etymologies, or speculates on linguistic oddities, or shares little tangents that might not appear in a more tightly scripted course. I think that might be a product of him being one of the best-selling people from the great courses. Some people might find that looseness charming, while others might prefer a more structured delivery. Personally, I am kind of indifferent. I enjoyed seeing Professor McWhorter feeling a little more comfortable, but I also really enjoy the very formal lectures that I've listened to in other cases. So I don't know if I have one way or another to really argue about it, but just something to consider. And I certainly still learned a ton. There's something satisfying about walking away from a lecture and immediately wanting to look up at a keyboard or a street sign and wonder, why is that shape like that? And this certainly does a great job at doing that for me. And as I've already pointed out, this course is serving double duty. In addition to just sheer interest, it is part of research for my History Unraveled with Dr. Duncan videos. And so again, I encourage you to go over there and take a look. I think I specifically have a video on the origins of writing, although I don't get quite to this point. I mostly am discussing cuneiform, and I'm sure I will shortly have one on hieroglyphs. So who is this course for? Well, this course is absolutely for you if you're fascinated by language or writing or the hidden history behind everyday things like the letters on your keyboard or the punctuation marks that we don't necessarily think much about, but certainly can have a big impact on the way we understand our various texts or messages. If you've ever stopped to wonder why is the alphabet in that order or what even is the point of the letter Q, well, good for you if you have done that. But if you have, I think that this is going to be a very fascinating and wonderfully rewarding lecture series for you. It's also a great fit for fans of linguistics who don't want to get bogged down in technical jargon. You don't need to have a background in phonetics or ancient languages to enjoy this course. Professor McWhorter breaks things down with wit and clarity, making it accessible for lifelong learners or high school or college students and even just curious individuals. So if you're a teacher, a writer, or a history buff, or just a language nerd like myself, then this course will give you some fun facts, certainly some historical insights, and intellectual rabbit holes galore. That is the way that he thinks, and that is the way he presents it. And so if you are researching the development of writing systems or prepping for a lecture, or I don't know, say a YouTube series like myself, I also think that this is a fantastic low-stress resource that will help deliver on some of the most important elements of the earliest elements of writing. Who is this not for? Well, this series is packed with fascinating information, but it's not going to be the best fit for everyone. So if you're looking for maybe a traditional, highly structured academic lecture series, maybe just one with fewer digressions, then maybe you won't care for this one. You might find it just a little too meandering, although he still has the main points that he's making, and I think he makes them well, but he does obviously have his digressions. Also, this is not going to be for people that want a particularly deep dive. I mean, it's only 12 lectures. I know 6 hours of lectures, you might think that's a lot, but you could keep going. I mean, clearly he could have kept going. I think that at any given point, he had to start clipping what was going to go in each of the lectures. Every letter probably could have had its own video, although that is one thing that he argues. He does not think every letter is as interesting as the next, and he makes that point several times. So that is also something worth considering if you are looking for a series to pick up. Also, if you're not interested in language or writing systems, this series probably won't convert you. It's, it's not particularly dramatic or action-packed, so you probably still aren't going to be a big fan of the history of languages, and that's fine. That's okay. Don't pick the series up. There are plenty of others that I'm sure could keep you engaged. All in all, I would say that Ancient Writing and the History of the Alphabet is a short but rewarding great courses series that delivers exactly what the title promises and a whole lot of thoughtful surprises along the way. Professor John McWhorter is a wonderful guide. You'll come to see our alphabet not just as a tool we use, but as a historical artifact shaped by millennia of accident, adaptations, and cultural exchange. It's a great entry point into linguistic thinking. And while the delivery is, again, a little more relaxed than some of his other series, that informality adds to the charm. So whether you're watching for fun or for research or just to scratch that intellectual curiosity, this course is well worth your time. And if you're enjoying this kind of content, don't forget to check out my other channel, History Unraveled with Dr. Duncan, where I'm using courses like this as part of a larger exploration into how writing, civilization, and culture evolve. In the meantime, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you have watched or listened to this series, what letter did you find most interesting? Or if you watched or listened to anything else by Professor McWhorter and you want to comment on it, or you just have thoughts about languages, whatever it is, please, let's get the conversation going in the comments. I'd love to hear what you're thinking. And again, if you were interested in this video, please go check out my other videos in my Great Courses playlist. And if you're enjoying this video or any of my other videos, please feel free to share them. The more people that know about my channel, the more videos I can make. And don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. And until next time, keep those pages turning.